Welcome back, everyone. Glad you could join me for a brief explanation on what we're looking at with this assignment regarding engine lubrication research. So what I want to help you hopefully get a better handle on with this particular assignment is understanding how to do accurate research to select lubricants for a reciprocating engine. The reason that I have this project set up is because it can get a little bit confusing sometimes. There's a lot of different factors that we have to look at. You'll remember on the previous video we talked briefly about how we have to match the approved grade of oil that we're using to the temperature range that we expect to operate within. That is one of our primary goals when we try to establish what lubricant we're using. And we have a couple different ways of trying to find that information. So we're going to start off looking at our manual. Now, I'll tell you now, I'll probably end up telling you again in another video, one of the biggest problems that we fight trying to help students understand is manual literacy. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to understanding how to use manuals, and there's a lot of different ways that different manufacturers will present information to the mechanic that's looking for it. So one of the first things I can say that will be extremely helpful to you is get yourself away from using Control F. Start to learn how to use the actual table of contents within these manuals. And the reason being is a lot of PDFs, when they get scanned in for text recognition, the scan may not be that accurate. So you may be searching for a term that doesn't show up, but it just hasn't been accurately altered or accurately scanned in to provide text recognition within the document. So you may be searching for the right term, but the PDF can't find the right term because it doesn't recognize that's the word you're looking at. The other thing that will happen is a lot of different maintenance manuals will phrase the terms they use in slightly different ways, but it may be different than what you're expecting. So for instance, if I'm looking for a chart for oil selection and I just search oil, then it may show me everything within that PDF that talks about oil. However, the one spot I'm looking for the grade of oil to use may be labeled within the manual as lubricant selection, in which case, if I search for oil, I'm not going to be able to find it. Now, you may be telling yourself, oh, well, I'll just search for more terms. It's going to take you way longer to do that. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. If you understand the information you're looking for and you understand how to use these tables of contents, it's going to make your life way easier. So, first of all, the thing to notice about this, I've only taken a small section of our table of contents. As you can see, they get broken down into different sections, and then we have the page that pertains to each section. Now, again, a lot of manuals will do this differently. Sometimes you'll have what they call a leading particulars section or an engine specifications portion at the front of the manual that gives you a lot of this information for the types of lubricant used. In other cases, looking at the 0470 manual, they actually store this information in general information under engine reciprocating, which is about a quarter of the way into the manual. And if you're searching just for the term oil, there's actually another section at the end of the manual that talks specifically about lubricants, but only references a specification from Teledyne Continental. It doesn't give you any information about the grades of oil that you're using or the quantities or anything like that. So it will lead you to a dead end there as well. So what we're going to be looking in right now is the general section under section 72, page 72-00-02. As we jump over to that, one thing we'll see along the way that is also useful is the information is not always stored all together. So in this case, you can see that we're actually up in section 5, and this is where we find our information for inspection intervals and timeout limits, which oddly enough gives us the information we need here for oil change intervals and our oil filter intervals, depending on the different style of filter we're using. So another thing that can be kind of confusing is these manuals are typically written for an entire series of engines. So if I'm talking about the 0470, we could have a manual that covers all the submodels A through T, and it can be different installations, different filters for each one of them. So we have to make sure that we're finding the accurate information for what our particular installation is. So as we move over, this is what we find in the general section under engine reciprocating, where we find our information about oil. it gets very specific in this case. This is not going to happen 100% of the time in this section for all engines and all manufacturers, but in this case they're very specific. So we can see right here they've laid out our first 25 hours of operation. They tell us that we're using a non-detergent mineral oil or a corrosion preventative oil. So again, that straight mineral oil being used to help break in the rings. For normal service, we have our temperature listings. This will be familiar somewhat from another video, but we have all of the temperature ranges. So if we're using a multi-viscosity oil, either this 15W50 or 20W50 as a multi-viscosity oil, then we can use this acceptably for all temperature ranges according to the manual. However, we may opt to use something else if we're dealing in extreme temperatures. So again, a little bit of reiteration. If we are in a climate that is going to be no lower than 30 degrees Fahrenheit, we can use SAE 50 oil, which in our commercial aviation grade application is going to be 100. Similarly, if we are operating in conditions that will not exceed 50 degrees in temperature, then we can go with this SAE 30 or 10W30 as the oil that we're using with the particular engine. We'll also get information here with oil pressure. So here we have our idle pressure and our normal operation pressure. We see we have 10 at idle and not to exceed 30 to 60 psi during normal operation. Pretty straightforward. What I want to talk to you about next is another resource we have. One of the issues we run into with manuals is that once a manual is printed, it is very rare to see a complete reprint of a maintenance manual. Typically, we get revisions, and those revisions are added in. So if a manual is updated, then the manufacturer will make available the revision pages, and you'll get a sheet and a whole bunch of pages that say, replace pages 10-20-2 with the newest version. And we stick those into the manual as updated information. A lot of times it may have something to do with part manufacturing lines consolidating, so now they're changing part numbers, or it could be that in response to a airworthiness directive or a service bulletin, they've changed the recommended maintenance procedures for that particular appliance. And so updated manuals are always very important for us. However, depending on what we have, in the case of the manual we were just looking at, that was originally printed in 1991. Well, I should say the original version was printed far earlier, but the revision for that one was 1991. If we look at our type certificate data sheet, this has been updated November 2nd, 2011. Now, it doesn't necessarily always mean that something about the engine has changed. If a type certificate changes owners, then we can see an update to the TCDS. But again, we have some useful information that pops up in our type certificate database right here, or our type certificate data sheet for lubricating oil, and that's what we're looking at. We have a reference to note 6, but we also have our ambient air temperature and the degree rating. So above 40, below 40 Fahrenheit, we have SAE 50 and SAE 30. Those are familiar from what we saw in the overhaul manual. And this is what can be in the engine to conform with the type design, which is an important thing when we talk about signing things off for return to service and establishing that they conform to their type design. But while I'm here pointing this out, let's take a look at note number 6. It's referenced there with lubricating oil, so let's see what we find there. Note number 6, it's going to give us a little more information. Oil, straight mineral or ashless dispersant oil meeting TCM spec MHS-24. So this spec that they're talking about is a specification that's been released by Teledyne Continental Motors, a company. Most of these specifications and service bulletins are very, very easy to search, either through Teledyne Continental's website. In other cases, Lycoming is a little bit more difficult, but usually it can be accomplished through a simple Google search to find the information you're looking for, especially if it's a weird service instruction pertaining to something like this. You'll also notice that some of these other notes surrounding this will cover similar concepts. So here, note 7, a full flow oil filter may be used with these engine if installation incorporates a filter bypass valve which opens between 12 and 16 psi. So again, a lot of these engines were not originally designed to use spin-on oil filters or full flow oil filters, and so that may get altered in the form of a supplementary type certificate, so you can buy a part that comes with an STC, install it to be able to use a spin-on filter. We certainly have a few engines in our hangar that operate that way, or it may be something that's direct from the manufacturer that creates that allowance, depending on what the situation is and how the engine is going to be modified to continue to conform to that type design. That's everything I wanted to cover here. Appreciate you taking a look at this with me. If you have questions, please post them up on the discussion forum. And if you have trouble finding any of these references, please send me a message or post on the discussion forum, and I can help you try to find those references as well. Thanks.